One thing Sophie Cunningham won't do is play along just for the sake of playing along.
WNBA furious after Sophie Cunningham admits 8th grade boys could beat WNBA players. Full narration script. One thing Sophie Cunningham won't do is play along just for the sake of playing along. And what she...
Junior last week came out, stated something fairly obvious. He said that top 8th graders would beat a WNBA team. Top 8th graders. Not freshmen, not sophomore, not juniors, not seniors.
Just admitted. It sent shockwaves through the entire WNBA community. The internet absolutely erupted the moment Sophie Cunningham openly said something that most players would never dare speak out loud. After NBA star Michael Porter Jr.
Top 8th grade boys beating a WNBA team. Michael Porter Jr. took a lot of heat for that statement. And Sophie Cunningham was asked to speak on this. We have Angel McCordry talking about the clip, going after Michael Porter Jr., saying some questionable things and some things I'm going to poke some holes in. And of course, Sophie Cunningham taking heat from the old guard for saying what's true.
Is real, that the physical differences can't be ignored, and that people need to stop pretending otherwise. And just like that, all hell broke loose. Let's rewind for a second. Michael Porter Jr., the Denver Nuggets forward, came out last week and stated something that a lot of people found pretty obvious.
I will just tell you, I was working out, and when did this tweet, can you scroll down? When did this tweet come out yesterday? I guess this started kind of hitting social media platforms, but I'm not kidding. I think maybe 35 people sent me this tweet yesterday. And yeah. I was like, what?
But nobody really wanted to say out loud. He claimed that top 8th graders, not high school freshmen, not sophomores, not juniors or seniors, but literal middle school boys, could beat a WNBA team. Now, before you roll your eyes or dismiss it, understand this.
But he said this kind of I feel like a year or at least 4 or 5 months ago, something kind of regarding the same topic. So I thought it was just kind of resurfacing. Mm-hmm. But then I saw it and I was like, people are kind of going in on him because it doesn't the timeline doesn't make.
Michael wasn't talking about some random kids shooting hoops at the park. He was referring to elite, future professional level 8th graders. The kind of boys already 6 feet tall, explosive off the dribble, training at insane levels, and heading...
What I gathered, he basically was trying to say, no one should compare NBA and WNBA players together because he could beat you guys in basketball in one-on-one when he was in 8th grade.
For Division I programs, or even the NBA, Michael Porter Jr. took a ton of heat for that statement. A lot of heat. The backlash was instant and intense. And naturally, the question turned to current WNBA players. What would they say? How would they respond?
8th grade, and you guys were in high school.
I think, and this is my personal opinion, but if you are...
That's when Sophie Cunningham was asked to speak on this clip. And her honesty, it set off a storm across social media and inside the league itself. Some people praised down later. And of course, Sophie Cunningham started taking heat from the old guard for doing nothing more than saying what's true. Here's the thing. Sophie never planned to be at the center of all this chaos. She wasn't looking for attention or trying to stir the pot. But the moment Michael Porter Jr.'s comments resurfaced online, everything shifted. It started quietly at first, just a few messages, a couple of tags on social media. But within hours, her phone was flooded with more than 30 notifications from people sending her the exact same clip, all of them asking for her reaction. She was in the middle of a workout when she finally checked her phone, and at first, she thought it was just an old conversation floating around again. You know how the internet works. Something from months ago suddenly goes viral for no reason. But when she actually looked at it, she realized this was different. The clip had exploded all over social media. The timeline was going absolutely insane with anger, confusion, and heated arguments flying in every direction. Now, Michael Porter Jr. made a pretty straightforward claim. When asked at what age elite boys could beat WNBA players, he said 8th grade. And he wasn't guessing. This was something he experienced personally back when he was matching up against high-level girls while he was still in middle school. Instead of addressing the claim itself, though, critics immediately went after the timeline. They started questioning whether Michael and Sophie were even in the same age range, whether the story lined up perfectly, whether this actually happened the way he said it did. The timeline became the distraction. People were debating dates and school years instead of the actual issue Michael raised. It was easier for them to fight over the calendar than to confront the uncomfortable comparison he was making. Sophie quickly realized what was happening. The timeline arguments, they were just a shield. Nobody actually wanted to touch the real conversation. They didn't want to admit that elite male athletes, even at a young age, have serious physical advantages that translate directly into dominance on the court. They wanted to avoid the obvious truth. And that's exactly why this topic keeps getting brought up in the first place. Because a lot of WNBA fans, and we're talking a lot, genuinely believe that these players could beat Division I college men, that they could take down high-level elite high school boys, that they could even challenge NBA players in a one-on-one. These fans will literally die on a hill defending this belief. So instead of arguing about when Michael Porter Jr. was in 8th grade or whether the story checks out, Sophie did something different. She focused directly on what he actually said. She acknowledged that elite male players should absolutely be able to beat women in basketball. She said she wasn't surprised by it at all. And she flat out admitted that she didn't understand why this topic kept resurfacing when the answer has always been obvious to anyone who respects both sports. But Sophie's honesty triggered a whole new wave of backlash. Fans who straight up refused to accept reality shifted their frustration directly onto her. They weren't ready to hear a current WNBA player say the quiet part out loud. And the pressure around her comments, it only continued to build. The moment Sophie stepped into the conversation with honesty instead of defensiveness, the entire tone of the debate changed. Instead of dodging the question or trying to reshape it into something more flattering for the league, she addressed the core of it head-on. Michael Porter Jr. wasn't talking about random middle schoolers goofing around at recess. He was referring to elite 8th grade boys who were already on a clear trajectory toward becoming college prospects or future professionals. These are kids who are often 6 feet tall, incredibly explosive, and training at levels far beyond what most people can even imagine. When Sophie acknowledged this reality, she did something that most WNBA players actively avoid. She removed the emotion from the conversation and spoke purely from a place of experience. She explained that any elite athlete, regardless of gender, should expect to dominate a less physically developed group. It wasn't disrespect. It was simple logic. And she made it crystal clear that comparing NBA and WNBA athletes directly is completely pointless because the physical gap is undeniable. Her tone was calm, collected, grounded in common sense. There was zero attempt to sugarcoat the truth. She even admitted that she didn't understand why this topic kept coming back up, as if the outcome was somehow going to magically change. But the backlash came fast, and it came hard, because Sophie unintentionally exposed a much deeper tension within WNBA culture. For years, some fans have been pushing this narrative that WNBA players could beat Division I men, elite high school boys, or even challenge NBA players one-on-one. These claims grew louder and louder on social media as people tried to elevate women's basketball through comparisons that had absolutely no basis in reality. Instead of promoting the women's game on its own incredible strengths, the skill, the strategy, the competitiveness, they created an illusion. And that illusion collapsed the second someone told the truth. Sophie's honesty threatened everything they'd built. When she agreed with Michael Porter Jr. in a straightforward, matter-of-fact way, it shattered the protective bubble that some fans had carefully constructed around the league. The reaction wasn't about her comment being wrong. It was about her comment being right. And once a current player broke the silence, critics scrambled to redirect the conversation in any way they could. They tried to dismiss the question. They tried to attack the context. They tried everything except addressing the truth she laid out. As Sophie's comments spread like wildfire, the backlash from the old guard of the WNBA community grew louder and sharper. These were the same voices that usually push a very strict narrative about women's basketball, one that relies heavily on insisting that the talent gap between men and women is way smaller than it actually is. The moment Sophie refused to play along, they turned on her. Instead of engaging with her reasoning, so many people attacked her character. They accused her of being a pick-me, of pandering to male fans, of actively weakening the league by acknowledging something they believed should never, ever be said out loud. The criticism had absolutely nothing to do with basketball. It had everything to do with protecting an image. This group often reacts purely emotionally to any comparison between women and men in sports. They insist that WNBA players could beat elite high school boys, or that NBA players are exaggerating their physical edge. Sophie's willingness to speak honestly struck at the very heart of that belief system. She exposed the cracks in their logic without even trying. The old guard didn't want a real conversation about skill, athleticism, or development. They wanted unity, even if it meant repeating something completely unrealistic. And Sophie's candor made that impossible. What made the situation even more explosive was that Sophie didn't attack anyone. She didn't mock her own league. She didn't disrespect women's basketball in the slightest. She simply spoke from experience. And yet, the reaction she received was far harsher than anything ever directed toward Michael Porter Jr. That alone showed the deeper problem here. These critics weren't actually angry about the comparison itself. They were angry that a current WNBA player validated it. It felt like betrayal to them. The more they attacked her, though, the more people outside the WNBA bubble stepped in to defend her. Fans, analysts, and players from other levels all echoed exactly what she said, pointing out the obvious physical reality. Elite boys grow faster, jump higher, move quicker, and develop strength earlier. But this only made the old guard angrier. They doubled down, claiming that anyone agreeing with Sophie was either biased or completely ignorant. By the end of the day, it was painfully clear the backlash wasn't really about Sophie's words at all. It was about control. The old guard wanted to dictate the narrative, and Sophie flat out refused to follow the script. Then the debate reached a whole new level of intensity the moment Angel McCordry stepped into the conversation. As one of the more vocal veterans associated with the old guard, she delivered a response absolutely filled with emotion, frustration, and a deep insistence that men should never compare themselves to women in sports. Angel framed Michael Porter Jr.'s comments as some kind of obsession, questioning why he even talked about women so often and implying that he must be insecure. Her argument quickly shifted away from basketball itself and dove straight into the personal struggles that women experience. She mentioned playing through painful periods, dealing with pregnancies, taking care of families, and balancing the responsibilities of being both athletes and mothers. Now, these are absolutely real challenges, and nobody denies that women endure things men simply do not. But the way Angel used these points to reject a basketball comparison, it created confusion. She talked about headaches, load management, and emotional support rather than the actual athletic question at hand. Instead of addressing whether elite 8th grade boys could beat WNBA players, she reframed the entire issue into a moral lecture about respecting women. The argument sounded strong, emotionally, sure, but it fell apart logically because it never actually answered the question. Angel also suggested that NBA legends like Kobe Bryant and LeBron James never made these kinds of comparisons. But that point failed too, because those players never needed to comment on something so obvious. Professional male athletes don't spend their time debating whether they could beat women. Everyone already knows the answer. It only becomes a conversation when fans push unrealistic narratives or when a player like Michael Porter Jr. gets asked directly. Angel's criticism completely misrepresented why this topic even resurfaced in the first place. Her emotional tone created a massive divide online. Some people praised her for standing up for women. Others felt she was avoiding the truth and trying to guilt people into protecting a narrative rather than acknowledging reality. And while her intentions may have been to uplift the WNBA, her response unintentionally highlighted the very insecurity she accused others of having. But what made Angel's comments even more controversial was that they opened the door for critics to compare her words to the actual behavior of WNBA players. And that became a problem she never expected. Angel's argument began to completely unravel the moment people started comparing her claims to what actually happens in the WNBA. She emphasized that women play through unimaginable pain, carry these heavy emotional loads, and compete at the highest level even when dealing with physical challenges that most men will never experience. But the reality that fans pointed out online, it told a very different story. This season alone featured several high-profile WNBA players taking extended breaks, load managing, or sitting out for non-serious issues. The image of endless toughness that Angel tried to present clashed directly with the visible behavior of the league. Critics immediately mentioned examples like Satu Sabali taking time off during the season. Fans remembered this clearly and brought it up instantly. Others highlighted the stretch where Angel Reese appeared completely disengaged during games and later sat out the final matchups of the season. These weren't isolated cases. They represented a pattern that made Angel's claim that WNBA players never load manage absolutely impossible to defend. The league plays fewer games, has longer rest periods, and still sees players sitting out more often than Angel suggested. Angel's statement about NBA players load managing for headaches also failed to connect with reality. Many NBA players endure insanely intense schedules, back-to-back games, cross-country travel, and way more physical punishment. The load management issue in the NBA is tied to long-term health and the grueling 82-game season, not headaches or minor discomfort. Her comparison came off as exaggerated, and fans wasted zero time pointing it out. What really hurt her argument, though, was how quickly people contrasted her emotional claims with the straightforward truth Sophie shared. Sophie never argued about pain tolerance or responsibilities. She discussed physical ability and athletic development. Angel shifted the conversation toward sympathy, while Sophie focused purely on reality. This difference made Angel appear defensive, as if she needed to rely on unrelated hardships just to avoid answering the core question about athletic performance. As critics continued to dismantle Angel's points, the conversation took yet another turn. Once the debate shifted from athletic reality to emotional defensiveness, the reaction online became even more volatile. Sophie Cunningham suddenly found herself targeted not only by former players, but by an entire wave of WNBA fans determined to shut down her honesty. Instead of debating the physical differences she discussed, so many people attacked her personality. They claimed she was seeking male approval. They called her a pick-me. They argued that she was actively harming women's basketball by refusing to protect the image they wanted the league to project. None of these reactions focused on basketball itself. They were pure attempts to pressure Sophie into silence. This backlash was driven by a very specific group within the fan base, the ones who treat any criticism of the WNBA as straight-up betrayal. They saw Sophie's comments as crossing a line. In their view, a current player is supposed to defend the league at all costs, regardless of whether the argument is even factual. For years, these fans built this online bubble where they repeated the idea that WNBA players could beat male college athletes, elite boys teams, or even challenge NBA players one-on-one. They convinced each other that these claims were empowering. So when Sophie acknowledged the reality that elite boys are physically stronger and more explosive, it destroyed the narrative they completely depended on. Instead of adjusting their views, they attacked her for breaking the illusion. Some even took the argument into absurd territory, accusing Sophie of undermining women's accomplishments simply by acknowledging biological truth. Others insisted that Michael Porter Jr.'s comments were rooted in insecurity instead of athletic fact. They didn't want logic. They wanted emotional validation. But as the criticism grew, something else began to happen. People outside the WNBA bubble started stepping in, calling out the delusion and defending Sophie for simply telling the truth. And that shift, it completely changed the direction of the conversation. Fans, analysts, former college players, even coaches all began stepping in to defend Sophie. They argued that she wasn't diminishing women's basketball at all. She was simply refusing to pretend that biology doesn't matter in sports. Her honesty became a rallying point for people who were absolutely tired of the unrealistic comparisons that constantly surface online. Many pointed out that acknowledging physical differences does not devalue women athletes. It only recognizes the reality of how athletic development actually works. Yet this logic only made the most defensive fans angrier. Some critics doubled down, claiming Sophie's comments would hurt the league by giving ammunition to people who mock women's basketball. Others insisted she was undermining her own accomplishments. The most extreme voices accused her of damaging the progress women have made in the sport. They wanted her to repeat the narrative they created, not the truth she experienced firsthand. What they feared most, that her honesty would expose just how fragile their arguments had always been. Comments across social media became more and more intense. Some users insisted that elite male athletes couldn't possibly lose to WNBA teams, no matter how talented the women were. Others said they would literally bet everything they owned on top 8th grade boys defeating a WNBA roster. People familiar with AAU circuits chimed in, describing just how explosive, tall, and physically dominant elite boys can be at that age. These weren't casual opinions. They were observations from people who actually coach or compete at high levels. Their testimony further supported exactly what Sophie said. But the debate was about to take an even sharper turn as more fans weighed in. The conversation expanded way beyond Sophie and Michael Porter Jr. It began to collide with another ongoing tension in the WNBA, the role of Caitlin Clark, and how her presence has disrupted every single part of the league's culture. Suddenly, Sophie's honesty wasn't just about basketball anymore. It became part of a much bigger cultural divide that has split the fan base into two fierce camps. The moment people mentioned honesty or realism, Some fans immediately dragged Caitlin Clark into the discussion, claiming that Sophie's comments were somehow connected to the controversies surrounding her. It didn't even matter that Caitlin had absolutely nothing to do with this conversation. They forced her into it anyway. Some critics went as far as saying Sophie's remarks were proof of an underlying bias within the league, accusing her of feeding narratives that favor Caitlin Clark's fan base. These claims had zero connection to the original topic, but they spread like wildfire because the WNBA is already fueling an internal culture war. Anything that challenges the old guard automatically gets lumped together as part of the Caitlin Clark effect. By the time the conversation reached its absolute peak, it was crystal clear. This was no longer about eighth-grade boys or Michael Porter Jr. It was about the WNBA's struggle between truth and delusion, between realism and image control, between players who speak freely and those who demand silence. The entire debate showed just how deeply divided the league's culture truly is. Sophie Cunningham never intended to start a firestorm, but her honesty forced the WNBA community to confront a truth that so many tried desperately to avoid. A simple admission about athletic differences exposed much deeper issues within the league: unrealistic expectations, internal divides shaped by loyalty and insecurity, and shifting fan dynamics that nobody wants to address. Her comments revealed exactly who valued reality and who preferred comfortable illusions. And as the debate spread far beyond her words, it became painfully clear that this conversation was never just about eighth-grade boys. It was a reflection of the WNBA's ongoing struggle between authenticity and image. And that struggle, it's far from over.